So Gary, thank you for coming. Gary Jeffries is a financial planner. Does anyone here know what the difference between a financial planner and a normal, just like a financial advisor is? So that's very, very normal. So Gary's going to enlighten you because it's a very, very important difference, especially if you're going through divorce. So that's, are you surprised by that, Gary?
Not really. The thing is that there's financial advisors and financial planners is quite a wide marketplace, and certain clients have certain needs, relatively low-level needs, and as it gets more needing advice, then you need someone who's got a greater degree of both qualifications and experience. And a situation such as divorce is complex in lots of ways, not just in financial ways, it's lifestyle ways, and you need to be able to balance all those aspects and work towards a plan where you can see some light at the end of the tunnel.
But a financial advisor might be doing mortgages, insurance.
They'll tend to be more transaction based, so they'll do a term insurance for you, or they'll do a mortgage or a pension. There isn't really an ongoing relationship where you're trying to provide something for both now and in the future.
And next to Gary is Andrea Cater, who is, as far as we're aware, the only divorce PA in the UK at the moment, possibly in the world.
What I do is, having come from a background of 30 years in finance and admin in business, I obviously have a skill set that means that I'm quite good at problem solving, paperwork filling, form filling, finding information out, writing letters and all that kind of thing, and all the things that actually very often at least one party in a divorce will be struggling with, because usually, or very frequently anyway, there's a partner in the marriage who is really good at the paperwork and admin, and there's the other one who leaves it all to the other one who's just left, and they're in a quandary as to how to work with their situation. But also the other thing is that sometimes people are completely poleaxed by their own situation, even though they might be fantastically good at admin and paperwork at work, but they can't deal with their own private stuff. So what I can do is help them provide a safe space and actually just sort of focus and concentrate and actually really get on with collating and form filling and getting all the information together, so that when you go to the solicitor eventually, or whoever you need to actually go to, you've got all that information already pre-arranged and collated, so that you make the best use of the expensive professional's time, and help them with some practical stuff that just makes it all seem like they're back in control again, and that makes a huge difference to their morale, when morale is quite often an enormous piece of the jigsaw.
And one of the reasons that your role was created was because I would find I'd tell people about a financial planner, but then they wouldn't get the paperwork and the information to the financial planner, so you were able to help them to do that.
Yeah.
And Claire, in a different way, you're helping people with their mental state in a way, because it's through their health and with nutrition. But you've got your own give us a short bit of your own story, because I think it's a good story.
I myself has been through a divorce, which was very, very traumatic for me. My children are very, very little. But we managed to work out a way to do things in the best way possible. And 20-something years later, we're still really good friends. All his family are my family. His mum is, I'm closer to her than I am to my own mum, So we managed to do it. It was very difficult, but we did manage to get through that. And for me, it's very important when you're splitting up, it's very important to look at nutrition and making sure that everybody's eating healthily, because it's often a time when everyone's very distressed, and so the first thing you stop doing is cooking properly, because most people are focusing on lots of other things. So it's like, well, I don't feel hungry, therefore I'm not going to eat, and I'll just get the kids a ready meal and things like that. So it's making sure that you are eating regular meals, eating healthily, enjoying family time. So part of cooking, part of nutrition is sitting down and enjoying that meal together and spending that time together, because people tend to, when everyone's very distressed, they tend to spend time in their own bedrooms, and everyone becomes very isolated from each other. So it's trying to maintain a happy, healthy place together through really good, having fun cooking.
Yeah. And Ashley, you're working with families a lot through specifically in your role as a mediator, and you have a therapeutic role as well, don't you?
Yeah, because sometimes I see families as family law consultants, so that might be when both parties go to court, but one party's having a really difficult time with what is it they want to represent themselves as, how do they put across clearly what they want to express without the anger saying the wrong thing and representing them in the wrong way. And so it's about having one-to-one time with them to talk through how do they look at what they want to achieve. So we'll go through that. That's kind of the crossbreed between therapy and the law side of things. And also I'll do a child-focused mediation if that's what people would like. So it's a combination, but I do work as a therapist independently as well, but usually around divorce, etc.
You find that when people are in an emotional state that they're not able to deal with the financial aspects and as well.
So as much as I am qualified to be a finance mediator, I don't do that. The only time I work with finance clients is if they are overwhelmed and they can't, again, think straight, and they're the ones that are, sitting there and can't hear what's being said, can't get to the place where they're feeling calm enough to be able to ask for the right help, and to know what it is that they need that is beyond that moment. So it's really trying to be able to find that sort of place really, and offer in the handover book sessions, which is something that myself and Lee are doing around the country, so that they're one-off independent sort of meetings that people can come to and understand how they can kind of come together. So it's a bit of all based around the same thing, but different terms. Yeah.
Depends what's needed. Verity, you've got more than one hat, haven't you? Because you were a traditional family lawyer, but you're also a collaborative lawyer. Did anyone here before they arrived know what a collaborative lawyer was?
Oh,
Yeah.
a couple of nods, yeah.
Oh.
Few of you.
And where did you know that from?
I think you and the journey. I mean, you can Google and it comes up whether it's collaborative practice or not.
Yeah.
We love collaborative.
Yeah, I love collaborative. It is a much more positive, more optimistic way to do the job that I do. And the reality with being a family lawyer is, sometimes I do have to put my court hat on, because that is the only way to get an outcome sorted out. But hopefully, what I aim to do is really try other things first. Traditionally, you perhaps would have gone and seen your high street lawyer, and they would have gone, okay, let's issue proceedings, let's go to court. There wouldn't have even been a discussion around, shall we do mediation, shall we do collaborative, what about arbitration? And now we have that whole kind of toolkit of things which might be appropriate and might work and might help. So we have to look at all those options really, and every divorce journey is very personal, so it will be a matter of what what the issues are, what the situation is, and figuring out what's going to work best for you, hopefully.
I know that in Australia, where they're quite strong on collaborative law, I met someone who got divorced in Australia with a collaborative lawyer and had a divorce coach by their side and had a financial planner with them who was acting as a neutral. Is that something that happens much in the UK, or do you think it should happen more?
Yeah, so that is increasingly happening within the collaborative practice. So the way collaborative works, for those of you who don't know, is that you instruct a lawyer who is not just a solicitor, but also specifically collaborative trained. We have a really intensive 3-day course, and then follow-up training to be collaboratively trained. So you would both instruct a lawyer who has had that training, and then rather than sort of letters going backwards and forwards and months with nothing really happening, all the work is done in a 4-way meeting. So both lawyers, both of you sit in a room and we talk about the issues and we try and get things resolved, which can be a lot quicker and a lot more cost effective. So that's how it works. But to support that process, we will quite often invite a family consultant who will be, neutral, but may do work with the parties outside of the process if that's going to help them. We can also have, people like Gary, a financial planner, come into the meeting and talk to everybody about, well, this is a great idea, but is it actually going to work in process, in practice? How's it going to look in 5 years? How's it going to look in 10 years? When the pensions kick in, is that all going to work financially? So yeah, we can absolutely bring in all different professionals that we think might help the scenario, and everyone works together. It's very much a team effort to get things resolved.
It just sounds so sensible. Yeah.
It does sound so sensible.
But Gary, why do you think that so few people have heard of of financial planners when creating a plan would seem one of the first most
Well,
important steps.
you've got people who are receptive to collaborative law and they don't even know collaborative law exists, and I would say financial planning is behind that. I think one of the things that's quite essential is that if you're going through that sort of situation, you need to have a position of what you need in terms of income or expenditure worked out for what you need first. So needs have to be the first aspect. What tends to happen is what people want, and that's much more expensive. And I think a lot of the stuff that we tend to want to try and do is, if we're going to mediate stuff, you want to get to the position relatively quickly. If you've got the old-fashioned cake, you can only cut it in half. And what tends to happen is you'll have £3,000 of household income, and one side wants 1750 and the other one wants 1750, and we're £500 short, and we can never get to that equation. So I try and get people to the need section first, and then if we've got any capacity on top of that, we move from there. And also not to make any rash decisions. When this is going forward, you need an element of time for the dust to settle or things to happen. So you know where you're going to go, what you're going to do, think about if you're going to have to move out the property, what you're going to have to buy on the other side, and all those things have a financial consequence. You know, you may need to be 5 minutes, if there's children involved, 5 minutes from the children, or 10 minutes from the children, and all these things have a knock-on effect because you've got travel time, school costs, all sorts of things that you can put into a plan and work out, this is what I need to spend for the next 5 years. You may have a situation where you erode some money just so you get to a point in time, and then possibly 5, 7 years down the line, you get a new job or a new career. Not ideal, but we're not in an ideal position. That's how we try and do, because it's sort of a fudge, because you're trying to balance things on both sides, with both sides not being quite happy.
So you're trying to get the initial situation, but I think the key, what I think is very important with financial planning, is that being able to then, once you've agreed a settlement, is looking at a long-term plan. Because there are people who get their court deal and then they come back a few years later and go, well, I haven't got enough for it, because nobody actually did the figures properly and looked long-term.
Or it's been spent, or circumstances have happened. As I said, you have to go down the needs aspect first and work out what a plan, and work in perhaps periods of 3 to 5 years to move on. Because otherwise, you can't do a complete plan. Because to make it work completely, neither side could actually make it work financially.
So once they've
it's
got
a moving
divorce,
target.
they can make their complete plan. So
Yes.
you can help before, which presumably helps them have some sensible suggestions when they go into mediation or collaborative law.
Yes.
Expectations.
Yeah, rather than complete lunacy,
Yes,
which
yeah.
tends to rule.
And I think sometimes the pension aspect of it gets a little bit, not overplayed, but it's part of the equation. And it's sometimes people do have like a mismatch with pensions. If you've got £100,000 of pensions or £100,000 of assets, in relative terms they're both the same. But people on the £100,000 pension think, oh, that doesn't matter, I'll give that away. The main thing that we all live on is income, and you need a flow of income throughout your career and working life and retirement. And if that doesn't match your expenditure, then we can't make it work. You're on a downward cycle.
So that it's important for people to get, at the very least, advice about pensions, because the way
Yes.
they interpret it is often completely inaccurate.
It can be a bit skewed.
Well, it's also one of those things that people focus very much on what they need today.
Yes.
Because you've got to sort out today first, obviously. So quite often what particularly the parties in a weaker financial position will say is, you know, I don't care about pension, I want the extra 100,000 because I want to get a nicer house and a better house near the school and for the children, whatever.
Which is
or
wants,
any house,
which
yeah.
is wants rather than
Which
needs
is
again.
great, but yeah, we have what we will work, you know, with someone like Gary to do is make sure that, okay, fine, that resolves the problem today, but what is your position going to look like in, you know, depending on your age, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And obviously if you're in your 30s, that's fine, but if you're in your 50s, 60s, we need to be much more cautious about how we're dividing those assets and making sure that you're not just panicking and accepting a deal because you want to get it done and you want to get the deal and you want to move forward, but it's actually not going to work for you in the future, because that's when you'll come back and say, why did you let me do this? What's all gone wrong?
And also, I was wondering that when there's a psychological pull between the parents, they need some rational thinking, and they need to hear some practical things of actually that they can't play games with each other's emotions.
No. in using the
and some
money
reality
as
checks,
a
and some
tool.
reality testing, and actually how does this affect not only the inequality sometimes of one earner versus the other.
Yes. And that then also has an impact, as Verity was saying, in terms of the age of the children,
Yeah.
because that dynamic changes probably every 5 years when they're 5 or 10 or 15, but it's still relevant in a different way.
And that could also help you get them to take the emotion out of it, because quite often that's where initially we'll meet with the client and the emotion will be, well, he or she doesn't deserve anything. Why should they have a nice house? I don't care where they live. And actually, as I think your film mentioned, you know, they do care really, because they don't want their child going to visit dad in a caravan. You know, they would like dad to have a suitable house.
You're not going to see the child.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And that's all emotion driven. And you have to really try really hard to strip that out and look at facts and finances. And someone like Gary can do that and go, actually, well, how's this going to work in real life? Let's reality test this and not look at who deserves what, but who needs what to pay the bills.
There's a lead-in period for that, isn't there? There's a 3 to 6 month period before they're going to listen, because some of the stuff that we've spoken to people when it's early on, it's almost a waste of time, but it doesn't really work. They need to be levelled off to it. People need to be levelled off to a degree where they can take it rationally.
Because I think one of the things that I hear, you know, day in, day out is don't see a lawyer because they're scary. I don't think they're scary. They will force you to argue. I promise we don't, and not a good one anyway. And they're really expensive. That's basically what people think about family lawyers particularly. And you know, from my experience, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, actually, it's really cheap. Of course, it's not cheap. But when you're dealing with your family's future, cheap isn't necessarily what you really want. You want value for money. And actually, if you can do the process and do work around the process and use the right professionals, you can make it as cost effective as possible. I think you said 25,000 earlier. That's not if you get into a situation where you're in a court process for financial matters and it's contested and it goes all the way through, and we spend 18 months and there's 2 lawyers, and you are easily looking at 25. You're probably looking closer to 50, and especially if people have well experienced barristers and stuff getting involved. That's basically both of you walking into a room with a suitcase containing 50 grand each and throwing it on the fire. All you've done is made a few professionals a little bit richer. We don't want to see that. That doesn't fill me with joy about my chosen career. What I want to see is you spending your money wisely and getting bits of help. The simplest example I can think of is someone like Andrea. If I get a client who comes into me wanting to do their financial disclosure and they bring with them 3 carrier bags with documents in no particular order, unsorted, and I've then got to spend the next day desperately trying to sort it all out, that's not a legal job, but that's still, I've got to charge them for doing that because I'm doing that work. Whereas you could get Andrea to come to your house, sort that all out for you, and then present it to me pretty much done, and I've got to spend much less time looking at it. And so it's just about investing in the right ways.
Yeah, and to give you some sort of context on that, probably I would charge you for a day what many a solicitor would charge for an hour, and that's frightening. And also the other thing is that if I did come in and do that help with you, not only would it make you feel more in control and you would know that you were coming to the meeting with your solicitor with the information that you actually needed, and there weren't glaring holes that meant that you had to go away and then come back again and book a time again and all that sort of thing. But also I could help you put in systems which make you feel more in control and of your life moving forwards. And also I tend to look at things like, is it worth doing a cost comparison website to see whether we might be able to save you £300 a year on your utilities, and things that are obvious no-brainer things that of course you obviously ought to do, but lots of times in that crisis moment you won't revisit that, and those things change all the time, so there's always room for extra savings as well. So it's horses for courses. It's getting all the information together in the right order. Joining
Often,
the dots.
one of the problems is that in a relationship, you've got one person who's basically the financial adult, and I'm not always saying it's the man. It's many times it's the woman that's in charge of the finances, and the other partner doesn't really know how much things cost, how much it costs to run the household, and which company they've got the electricity and the gas with, etc., etc. So when people split up, it's actually very difficult, because if they're not getting on and not talking to each other, then you've got one person who's suddenly, well, I don't know how much this costs, and I don't know how much it's going to cost, for the children's school dinners, or for this or for that or whatever. And it's very hard, because you need to train that person to become a financial adult and work out what their budget is, and how much money they can spend per week on food, and what money they need to keep in reserve. And so that's one place exactly where, Andrea, you've got a whole series of skills there that you can really help them to see, well, if we save less money on this, save some money on this, then we're going to have more money for that. But it is actually very hard, and that can be a very challenging thing, because people just say, well, I want a global amount when they split up, but they don't understand, well, actually, I need to understand on a daily basis what it's actually costing me to run the car. Because, you've got some wives, I've got friends who married very young, married very well, and, were just given basically a black American Express card, and then that was it. So they just spent what they needed to. They're just like, well, I want that dress, it costs
Not what
£600.
they needed to.
What they wanted to.
What they wanted. Like, I need a new handbag, therefore I'll go get one. No, you don't need a new handbag. You've chosen to buy a new handbag because you have the money to do it. So they never really understood how much money was there. And then suddenly, they're splitting up, and husband's now met, a very gorgeous, lovely lady who's 20 years younger, who also wants to have all those lovely things as well. And of course, hubby is now no longer able to provide that for two families at once. So suddenly they're going from having this much money to suddenly, we've only got this to live on, and they find it a real
It's quite an adjustment.
That's the key. That's the massive key.
I think also the other thing about that is that actually in some cases the level of financial unawareness, if that's a word, is such that you could say to that person, the settlement is X pounds, and they'll think, oh gosh, that's plenty, that sounds a lot. But actually, if they have no understanding of what that means in real terms, and how that will be eroded very quickly once they've used that to purchase a house and the car that needed replacing and whatever else, and what's left will then not actually suffice.
Giving them the options.
Susan, that's a question I was going to ask, and I'm sorry if this makes me sound very stupid, but
Nothing else.
we've got a collaborative lawyer, a mediator, and an arbitrator. Which one do you work with all? What are the different? I guess I'm a little bit confused. Which one?
The simple way to look at it is mediation often does the job fine for a lot of people and can be very low cost. And so it's a very good place to start.
And you have to have a mind if you're going to go to court first.
Yeah.
We're
assuming that they've decided you want to avoid court, so you're looking at your dispute. Yes.
Unless you've tried and they've refused,
Yeah.
then you have to go.
So with collaborative law, I always liken it to I had all my children at home. I love the home births, but some people want to be in hospital with the white coats, so they feel more secure, and some people feel more secure with a lawyer by their side. Or if it's very, very complex finances and they want to have financial independence in there, there's a lot of reasons why the collaborative can also be a very good option for people. They should certainly look into it. It will obviously tend to cost more initially because you're not just got one mediator, you've got two collaborative lawyers. But ultimately, if it's going to keep you out of court, it's still going to be many, many thousands of pounds cheaper.
Most collaboratives are something like, I think the average is about 3 to 5 meetings. Mm-hmm. So if you think, yes, you are paying 2 lawyers for 3 to 5 meetings, which could be, an hour to maybe 3 hours a meeting. Yeah. So that's, a fair amount of money. But actually, if you think about what you're saving in the cost of a court process, and or letters going backwards and forwards, months and months on end,
and time as well, because
the meetings can very much be done on your time scale. So if you aren't ready, and that kind of ties back into your question, where if it's not quite emotionally, people aren't ready, you might have that first meeting and then both go away and do some work and get ready. Mm-hmm. But if you are ready and you just want to bash it out and get these issues sorted, subject to everyone's availability, the meetings can be done quite quickly, so you're not waiting around for a court process. arbitration comes in more if you haven't been able
Yeah.
to reach an agreement and you need a third party to step in and go, that is the decision. You are no longer able to make a decision, that is the decision.
And sometimes you can actually have that just on a single issue.
Yes.
can't you?
Yeah.
So rather than it dealing with the whole agreement, it will just be there's one sticking point that you just can't get to the end of, and
Yeah.
at that point you just literally appoint the arbitrator for that point.
So instead of it all unravelling, and then you go into court, and the judge isn't necessarily interested in all the things you did agree on. It's like you start all over again. So with an arbitrator, and you choose them again. It can be just a few £100. It doesn't have to be massively expensive, and they're specialist in their area, which you don't know that the judge in the court is actually a specialist in that area. So you have more control.
So would that be, for instance, if you were working with a collaborative lawyer and there was a point where you could bring the arbitrator sort of on the side to work just on that point?
Yeah, so we could
carry on the rest?
instruct an arbitrator to
Okay.
answer that issue.
Yeah.
And if it is just a one issue thing that's maybe something sort of technical about what should the pension share be or whatever, we can provide them, we can do that sometimes on a document basis only. So we literally provide them with the relevant documentation, say a pension sharing report or whatever we've got, the facts and figures and some submissions, and we can just do that as a very streamlined process. Obviously if it's more wide ranging or more complex, then there might need to be an actual sort of hearing where the arbitrator and the relevant lawyers are
But again, that's a lot
present.
quicker than
But
waiting for a court date. And
absolutely, yeah, and you know you're going to, the court system is in crisis. I make no bones about saying that. That it is vastly underfunded and they're riddled with delays, and frequently we will go to court ready for a hearing and find that there's no judge available, they run out of time. Whatever happened, the judge hasn't had time to even look at the papers, let alone understand the issues. And that's devastating emotionally and devastating financially. So if you can be, at least you're in control of the process, that's the benefit of arbitration.
And it's important for their spouses to understand this, because their solicitors may not have described it as eloquently as Verity just has. And that's what you're up against often, is they've got perhaps the wrong information coming in there, and they don't realise what a dead end court can be.
A lot of arbitration hasn't taken off that well in this country, and a lot of the reason for that is that basically the starting point and end point seems to be, oh well, we have to pay an arbitrator, we don't have to pay a judge. And that almost is like people go, oh, I don't have to pay an arbitrator, and that seems to be enough. You have to look at it in the round, you have to look at all the benefits, and to me, from my professional perspective, arbitration is a no-brainer.
Yeah. And even in mediation,
it's so helpful.
Instead of getting one stuck on one point, you can have the arbitration, they make a decision, you abide by it, and then you can carry on with mediation.
So you could start with mediation and then, and I guess a mediator can take you through and obviously end you in the same place as a collaborative.
The mediator can bring other people into mediation. If both parties are okay with that, the mediator can bring in a pension advisor, a financial planner. It's very similar in that way, but we just don't have any law-based function to the actual process until they reach agreements, and then that gets passed on to the solicitor to make.
So you still have to end with a lawyer, effectively.
It will go
right?
to one from either party if they want to, or it doesn't have to. It depends on what the issues are. But if they're financial, certainly, or if they want to make an order, it's written out in a memorandum of understanding, so it's all done.
Yeah.
A bit like you package things up and then it gets handed over.
And then it becomes legally enforceable, which is a really
So it's
important bit. And sometimes
confusing.
people will come to their agreement and they won't bother with that bit, which is crazy, really, because you want that clarity in those boundaries.
One thing I was going to say, that in terms of legislation, is that although not always, and I would say it is moving, there's more men divorcing women and the men are the lower earners, but it tends to be generally the husband, is that women from 2004, their pension age went from 60 to 65 to 66, which means where beforehand we would have been projecting to make money so that you knew at a point in time, i.e. age 60, they were going to have in today's money £170 a week. That is now put forward to 67 and will move up to 68 and eventually to 70. So no state benefit will actually be available. So the splitting parties on both sides will have to make sure that the provisions that are made allow them to go almost to age 70 before they're going to get any state benefits. There might be other benefits in terms of means testing, in terms of state benefit, they're not going to get anything until they're at the current time.
If you go onto the CMS options website, there is a calculator. You put in the gross weekly income of the paying party, and you put in how many nights the paying party will have the children over the course of the year. So obviously if they have one night a week, that's 52, and it's in sort of chunks. And if you put those two figures in, it will tell you what the calculation should be. That's the most basic level. And then if you can agree that figure, great, you do it between yourselves. If you can't agree that figure, you can do it through the CMS. They will charge both the payee and the payer for that, for using that service, because they don't want you to use the service, they want you to do it. Yeah, exactly, you're just both wasting money. And especially if then the paying party doesn't pay, they can do sort of collection options and they charge even more. So the paying party loses more out of their wages than the child ever sees, which is just a complete waste of time and money for everybody. So ideally, with child maintenance, you want to agree that, and obviously that can be reviewed over time if if your children are very small and it goes on for a long time. You need to relook at that as income increases.
The difficulty can be getting that figure though from.
Yeah, absolutely. That assumes that you've got a good enough relationship, so they'll give you your gross income figure, or their gross income figure. Obviously, if you don't, then you need to be looking at you're going to need that anyway. So you're going to need that from.
And I think that's a big question actually. How enforceable, if you do need to go to court for a contact order or for a financial order, how enforceable are those in reality?
That's a big question, Susie. That's a big question. Financially, financial orders are pretty enforceable. So it depends what you're trying to enforce. But for example, if you've got an order where there's a sale of the property or something like that, those are really enforceable, because essentially at the end of the day you can go to the court and you can get a judge to sign a contract to sell that property if you absolutely need to. If the other person's been given the opportunity, there's an order and they're not complying with it, we can make them comply. Obviously, worst case scenario, you can have contempt of court, you can end up with somebody being imprisoned if they won't comply with things like disclosure orders, that kind of thing. So there are children orders are more difficult in terms of enforceability. There are provisions for enforceability built into the system. Query is how effective are they, and the difficulty is often that, for example, if you've got, often it's mum who's the primary carer who children live with, and she's not complying with the order, she's not allowing dad to see. It's not necessarily cut and dried. She won't just say, well, I'm not complying. She might do. But most mums will say, I'm not complying because the child's very distressed. She doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to go. He doesn't like it. He got injured last time he was there. So there's always a lot of background. And unless it's a very clear-cut case, it's very difficult then for the judge to say, right, enforcement. But there are enforcement options. So but they take time. It can be, if you've got a very difficult person on the other side, it can be a very difficult journey and a very long journey. But you do have to just keep kind of plodding along down the road, and you will get there eventually.
Eventually, but it's just about expectations. Could you just share the story you were giving us earlier about a couple who'd been spending a year fighting over children?
Well, and strangely, the mother wasn't denying any contact. What she was doing was not complying with any specific regularity. So when they were getting on, it was endless pot. But when they weren't getting on, it was nothing. So Dad wanted to put a minimum child contact arrangement in place. And when she was in a good mood, yes, she was agreeing to that. But then when it all fell apart, it was no, we'll go back to court. So it was kind of going this way and this way. So mediation was suggested so that they could talk about what that might be like for the child. And that took a year to get both parties to the table. And 3 hours, the consent order is going through. And it's going through, the child contact arrangements is going through so that there's a minimum. And that's what was discussed. This isn't about you know, you're seeing the child more than this, actually, every month when you're talking, but when you're not talking, this is going to be the minimum. So that the child can get an arrangement. So actually it's complex, isn't it? And so when you've got a relationship that's often on, you know, lots of families do get on, but then don't. Do, then don't. A new partner comes into play, and contact seems to just disappear, when actually you've had a relationship for 6 years with your child, and suddenly a new partner comes in and you've got nothing. What do you do?
And
how do you see your child again?
How much have they spent prior to sitting down?
£1 million.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things for me is from observing from the outside is that with any form of dispute resolution, you've cut a deal. Like, I'm working with a financial planner, you've had to communicate with the help of the professionals there. So that's an ongoing thing. So when you do have a bad time again, you know that if you go back and work with those people, you've got something that has worked in the past, as opposed to couples that have just used court, where it is then they just think they have to go back again.
It's the same with everything. The finances, the maintenance monies. If people can get to the point of what the maintenance is for, and actually it's all understood about why they're doing everything, it's much easier to come to a resolution. Yeah. If it's about the other person has asked for this and I don't think they deserve it, then you're going to fight forever. Mm-hmm. If one person says something unpleasant, the other one will defend and attack, and then it just carries on. Or it's perceived as an attack, perceived as a defence. It's never good. Somebody needs to break it first, and it's really hard because pride gets in the way or hurt gets in the way, and usually I think I'm right in saying that every single client that I've ever seen, at the bottom of it is hurt and fear. Yeah. And if we can get to what that fear feels like and it's acknowledged, then everything changes. The whole mindset changes. If you can see something in the other person that you're both in fear or you're both hurt, something both kind of go, you know what, we're sorry over it. But it takes that. It takes the ability to see it, feel it.
And I just want to say in the little film earlier, there was the quote from a long-term study that was done years ago in America about mediation, and sometimes people are surprised the idea that mediation, a wife might get a better settlement. But if you think about it, the father, as it's usually that way around, the father understands what the money's for. So they've looked at the financial situation. They understand it's not for her to buy new clothes. It's for the children mostly, and then they kind of make their own decisions. So the fact that you've got these calculators.
If she does buy new clothes,
yes,
she can, because she's spending money somewhere else for the child, but it's all coming from the same place. That's the difficult part, how it's received.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And earlier on you said you feel it here, not here.
Yeah.
And our left brain works completely different to our right brain, and our left brain is that brain that calculates stuff and says it's binary. It says yes and no. It says it's black or it's white, and you don't get any resolution using your left brain as such. When you have a sensation here, and it's an emotional connection, your right brain goes like that, and it can have an imagination as to what could happen. Yeah. So we're always trying to find something there that ignites this side that says it's possible.
Yes. One of the real benefits of the collaborative process, because we find that it's amazing how I was in a meeting the other day, and the wife genuinely didn't understand the plan behind the pension provision that the husband had set in place. He's self-employed, so he'd got some quite sort of sensible tax advice about putting large amounts of money into pension, blah, 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 blah. She didn't really understand where that had all come from. So she asked him that question, and he explained, oh, well, I took this tax advice, and because of what we were earning, da-da-da-da-da-da. And she said, great, that's really helpful, thanks very much. That conversation took about 5 minutes. Trust was, not restored, but trust was restored. She now understands she can move forward and have a sensible conversation about pension sharing and all of that kind of stuff. That process within correspondence or outside of that collaborative process between solicitors probably would have taken a month, and everybody would have thought some sort of accusation. Because trying to word that, could you just explain? Because a lawyer would read, and potentially the party would read, could you just explain? Oh, well, they think I've done something wrong. They think I'm being untoward. Straight away, you're spiralling into anger, into distrust, and you're making everything worse but actually it was just a very honest, genuine, straightforward inquiry.
Exactly.
So that's why sometimes, you know, the collaborative process has that benefit, and the same thing within mediation. You can actually have that conversation, and it clarifies things so much better than a text. Or
5 years of anger, of thinking that they've left me, they've got the life of Riley, they're living it up with a new partner, they don't care, etc., etc. So much hurt from that. 5 years on, they suddenly get into a room, you know, one party's in tears, and the guy says, actually, can I explain actually how it was? I was in therapy for a year because I was devastated at that, but I couldn't live for a moment longer with X, Y, and Z, and that's happened, that's happened. And she kind of melted into a position of, thank you. Because her perception of his experience couldn't be further from his experience of reality, and how much money he'd paid in therapy and how hard he's finding it. And you know, you got a job there, you know, to suit yourself. He said, I got a job there because I know you needed the money for the children, and I had no options but to take that job. I don't want that job. I hate that job. I was in therapy because of that job, actually all the sacrifices he'd made because he hadn't seen his children because she was so angry was completely different to how she'd seen him not interested in children, not, you know. And that's
It's all about
in an
perception.
hour.
It's all about perception.
And what you've just described there leads beautifully onto the next workshop,